at history is actually to look at where we are, and that can be glanced from Article 174 of our Constitution, which is where the chief guest actually addressed as he was finalizing the objects of devolution. And what is coming out from those objects of devolution issues about equitable sharing of resources. It's about political inclusion. It's about taking care of the marginalized and the minority communities. And so that then tells us that the, Kenyans, when crafting the Constitution, that is what they aimed, that the devolution of 2010 Constitution should be able to do. Now, first, forward, backwards, the real backwards, then you can see the elements of political inclusion / exclusion, as well as socio-economic economic exclusion and inclusion running through the various epochs in history. Whether you are talking of the pre-colonial period, when Kenya was under the British rule, and we have racial segregation. It's about the Europeans vis-a-vis the Native Africans on the one hand, as well as other racial groups, the Arabs and the Asians. And you go fast track again to the independent constitution, and you can see the clamor for reforms and for decentralization. KADU on the one hand representing the minority groups, and KANU representing the majority groups who are then the Kikuyus and the Luos. And so the feeling that the minority small tribes are being excluded politically, socially, and economically. And one of the things we established, and one of the common trends, and slowly we local authority systems are consolidated back, and the powers are closed, to decentralize back power to the center. And so you see all these narrative going on. And of course, then you have the clamor for constitutional reforms from the 1990s. And if you look at because we've looked through all the various drafts, from the CKRC draft to the bombers, to the harmonized draft constitution, to the revised harmonized draft constitution, the key issue of contention actually still remains there. The governance structures. What model should we adopt? Should we have 3 tiers of the local government? Should we have 3? Should we have 5? Again, the struggle for political inclusion. And why political inclusion is because then whoever also controls the political structures then controls who gets the resources. And that has been the question throughout. And that is what the 2010 Constitution then seeks to answer. Thank you.
Just very briefly, history is important because history shows us actual events as and when they happen, and it teaches us vital lessons as we look at those events when they happen. And when you reflect at it with hindsight, you get even more important lessons. Now, the discourse around inclusivity along all the areas of marginalization that have been identified is a discourse at bettering our democracy. And when you look at this bettering of democracy in the context of the wave theory of democracy, you see how waves move. Waves move and break, and if you're not careful, there can be a counter wave. And when you study the attempts at inclusion in our constitutional experiment from independence onwards, you notice that there have been elements of counterwaves. I can imagine the 27th of August, 2010 at Uhuru Park, when people look at Article 27.8 and look at Article 81 and say now the gender question has been resolved. 12 years later, Dr. Mutinda is talking about, I'll go to meet Wetangula, the third term speaker after. I mean, they're actually the fourth, if you consider Marende as the first one, because he served the remainder of that term. So that tells you that this is not a battle for the faint-hearted. How do you then keep hope alive? I keep telling people that the way waves move is that a wave can move and a wave can break, and there can be a counter wave. So what to do is to build dikes. When you have made progress that way, you build barricades, you build dikes to consolidate. Then you think about how to charge forward, because if you are not careful, the wave can break and actually push you back. So that for us, we speak with confidence, and I belong to that school of thought that there's no likelihood of reversals. Human history teaches us that demagogues can come and reverse everything. We must invest heavily in eternal vigilance. I know there's a place of political will, but it's not always there. The greatest assurance is eternal vigilance. And I know, Dr. Mutina, you know this. When we went to court over the advisory by Chief Justice Emeritus, the Parliament, the frustrations are there because not the state has muscle. And the state always assembles the best remunerated, the most incentivized lawyers. Then, of course, you are there asking for the pro bono ones to do it. The only thing that keeps them going is this thing called eternal vigilance. Their desire to include their name in history, that they did something to us, building that barricade against democratic reversals. So I think as we sit in this room, in our own small way, let us ask, what can we do to add one more building block to that dike so that you prevent reversals and you keep the wave moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sia. Dr. Mutinda, on the International Day of the Girl Child, you can tell from the authors that there was no marginalization. So, Caroline, on the question of marginalization, what do you consider the genesis of marginalization as we know it today?
Picking up from where has just left, I think the simple answer to this question, the simplified one, is one word, which is power. The construction of power, construction of power, and construction of power, which is really what chapter 4 focuses on. How was power constructed? And what power was found within the instruments that came in to construct a different entity that brought in a new concept of power, which was the Kenya before and the Kenya after colonialism. So what did the colonial body come in to bring, which was power, and bringing in power in a completely different dynamic? What chapter 4 looks at to conceptualize marginalization is to try and show the different structures with which they brought in and took on and really just empowered the whole definition of power and marginalized the rest of the communities, which has simplified the basic things that were very, that were easy to look at. Case in point, land. Land was a major thing. I mean, we had a colonial entity that came into Kenya, meaning that they came in and took on land because we all live, in a space that is occupied by land. So there was a whole dynamic to land. There was communal land before. People didn't have, didn't know these tired versions of having or owning land. But came an entity that comes and tells you, you no longer own land. We own land, and you will own land based on how we decide to own land as the state. Then move on to speak about political participation. So you could make decisions by yourselves in your own structures, in your own communities, through elders, through different venues and through different entities. And then comes an comes an entity that decides that we hold the power and you are subjects. Hence Mamdani's reference to subjects and citizens. You do as we say, and you do not have any power or any access to direct regulation of this particular power. Moving on to, in addition to that, saying there are people who, no, there's the economic discrimination because you have power, because there's political decision making, then comes in the part where you have to have an economic factor. Land is bringing in money, land is bringing in wealth, but whom is it bringing wealth to? It's no longer the people who owned this land, it's no longer the people who lived on this land. So comes in people this taxation of the age 16. meaning that young people cease to be young, they start working. And because the opportunities are limited, because the economic divisions and the economic blocks have been developed, then comes people who have to move into the urban areas trying to find access to, and this is even post-colonial, trying to find access to economic empowerment for them to be able to pay some of these taxes that has been imposed on them. But the opportunities are not guaranteed in the urban spaces. So you have a group of young people who have been marginalized and socially stratified. They have fallen into victims of the social stratification over society. And now they're being called hooligans because they're they're in a city where they're trying to get jobs to be able to pay taxes. This again brings in the concept of power. And then moving on to regional disparities, what the book refers to as containerization. So we have policies that decide that this is the place that you're supposed to stay in and you're not supposed to move in from this place to another. Looking at the Northern Frontier District, then what to do to the people in the Northern Frontier District who have not had access to economic empowerment because that was not one of the economic blocks that was identified. And then post-colonial, there is a whole conversation about how we need to make sure that the country stands on its own economically by continuing in the places that were economically viable, meaning that the rest of the places have been completely left out and will be left out, including the people who were not part of were not proximal to power and were not could not access power as was defined by the colonialists.
Okay, thank you very much. Luciana, a tough question for you. We all brag about the 2010 Constitution. It is the panacea of equality and redistribution and inclusion in Kenya. So the question then is, was there anything good prior? What do you consider the major intervention that had the greatest potential to undo marginalization prior to the 2010 Constitution? Is there anything that your research found?
Okay, thank you, Sam. In the chapter that I co-authored with Caroline, we have a section which we have titled The False Starts. And the chapter is called The Start, The False Starts, and The Final Promise. And why we title that section The False Start is because there appeared to be some attempt at deconcentrating power before 2010. But why we ended up calling them false starts was, even though it appeared that we were trying to take policy, administrative, and fiscal measures to decentralize powers, those measures were not genuine attempts at deconcentration. So whether you talk about the District Office for Rural Development, whether you talk about the establishment of regional development authorities, whether you talk about Sessional Paper number 1 of 1986, which proposed introduction of privatization, whether you talked about establishment of fiscal measures, the LATIF, there was a local area trust fund, there was a road fuel levy, RMLF, there was CDF. All of these fiscal incentives appeared to be some measure at removing power from the center and taking it to the people. So whether you attempted a policy measure or a fiscal incentive measure, what was keeping these measures from working was that there was no genuine attempt to actually shift power from the center to each of those incentives. So the state is saying on one hand, we want to deconcentrate power, but the state also wants to be the one to tell you how you will deconcentrate power. So there was no genuine attempt at actually shifting power from the center to the people. So even the fiscal incentives that were coming towards the end of the pre-2010 era, what we see is these incentives becoming tools for the political class to reward the people they wanted to reward, and therefore they don't go to the very groups that are marginalized. So the biggest threat is there was just genuinely lack of commitment towards this deconcentration. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof Ambani, oh, you already have a mic. Let's post-2010. Has devolution delivered? Give us the findings of your research.
Sam, I had private arrangement with my two sisters.
Yes.
I already asked that question, I will throw it to them.
As co-author of that chapter with Luciana, you do have that, Chris.
No,
but
don't worry.
because you've not said anything yet. Please just tell us, what has devolution delivered? Give us a snapshot of what those green and yellow tables in your chapter explain. Why should we pay attention to them? What has been delivered? What can you say about what devolution has delivered in the last 10 years?
Yeah, actually, I think the main focus eventually was to ask what devolution has done. And I think the question was, has it eventually delivered? And I think there were three areas that we were looking at keenly. One was whether it has incorporated people that were left out initially. Second is whether they have enacted laws that have promoted the welfare and rights of those previously left out peoples. And then three is whether there are actual projects or programs that have been initiated to support these previously marginalized groups. The first question, the answer is yes. Devolution has included. We can complain about the levels, the extent, but it has actually included. If we look, for example, at women, they fared badly at the ballot. So, for example, you have 98 women in the whole country at some point getting into the county assemblies nationally. But because of the gender top-up formula, when you talk about 98 out of 1450, we are able to bring in as many as 650 women, 670 women, in county assemblies. So with devolution came a structure, a design that included, that could guarantee inclusion. When it comes to persons with disability again, they also did very, very badly at the ballot. And so the only redemption for them appeared to have been the nomination. And that's where the drama starts. Yes, we get some in, which was not there previously, but they also cheated in the process. We went to counties that lied to you, they had a woman, they had a person with disability nominated, but that person had no disability. It still continues to happen. You also found that there were also hierarchies among the disabilities. So you found that if you are male with physical disability, you're likely to have more advantage. And then also generally, we found that many counties did not meet the bare minimum. Yeah, did not meet the 5% required by the Constitution. So they were cheated. They used to do better than women at the ballot in county assembly level, but then they do worse when it comes to governors. I think women outperform them. They do worse when it comes to sitting in committees, for example, in the legislative assemblies. They don't do quite well in speakership compared to women, but the conversation is there. They're getting involved. And like I said, we can discuss how much we wanted them to get involved, but I think they're far much better than before. In terms of laws, we also found that there are a lot of laws nationally, actually, that have tried to promote the welfare of these previously marginalized groups. So they're still marginalized, as Chief Justice said. We found a lot of laws now, nearly all countries. Whenever they establish an institution, they actually say women should be there, persons with disability should be there, and youth should be there. It's actually almost a standard line. Poor draftsmanship, lazy draftsmen, it's a standard line carried from the Constitution, not more than that kind of language. So they're actually getting involved in institutions of county. There's also an attempt to establish funds, and stuff like that, targeted at youth, and most of them have also required legislation. Of course, we ran out of the appropriation bills that actually promote equality for all these marginalized groups. They're quite a lot if you sample different countries. On the last one also, whether they are projects or programs, you will find all manner of innovations in that category. Counties have done extremely well in that area. And I'm not defending them, I'm not a spokesperson, and I can't talk about the corruption involved. I'm talking about what you can see. And it starts with things like sports. We have seen Olympics, we have seen tournaments, counties are even sponsoring teams, and mostly targeting youth and women, especially young women, in those kind of things. But even occasionally, you find Olympics or Paralympics for persons with disabilities. The Desert Olympics or Paralympics, the one in Nakuru, and counties are spending a lot of money. We talked to persons with disabilities that have been given sports equipment to participate. Some have been shipped, some have been transported and even given per diems to take part in those sports. Counties have invested in a lot of business, seed planting, giving women seeds across the country, giving women greenhouses or youthful persons fish ponds. You will see a lot of innovations down there, in those kind of realms, especially in innovation. You'll also see counties taking a serious interest in, for example, maternal health, antenatal health, and stuff like that. And I think one of the most outstanding, I don't know if anyone did this from Louisiana, I can understand, is Oparanya Care, I think, where a mother is encouraged to go to hospital throughout the clinics. There's a book that you keep checking, Alinda Mama of some sort. And a mama that goes through that, faithfully is given some cash to encourage them. And once they deliver, they even get a start back, complete what they need, and continue to pay the salary. So a lot of innovations are out there. Kakamega, Pasa, Nakuru, and I think those innovations will start coming upwards, and you'll see them emulated at the national level. And of course, the old things, the public works that started these days on the Roosevelt, start public works heavy, labor-intensive projects, involve the youth, involve the women, and let the money flow with the countries. A lot of the countries are doing all those kind of things. And all of that is just geared towards incorporating this people economically. If you don't do that, they actually want nowhere. So I think the answer is yes. We're really getting these people involved. We can discuss the details too.
Okay. That's a fantastic answer. I think you're ready to read the research. An interesting line from that 5th chapter is that they hypothesize a positive relationship between decentralization and inclusion of various groups. The more we decentralize, the more we attain inclusion. And the converse is also true, that the more we centralize, the more we marginalize. The one thing that is left unanswered in the book, and this is a challenge not only to the authors, but also to their donors who have decided to take leave. I'm hoping we shall find them somewhere and chase them for some checks, is the quality of representation. I think research needs to be done about the quality of political representation and what can be done to upscale it. So for example, how many bills have been sponsored by women reps in parliament? How many bills have been sponsored by the MCAs who've been brought in to get to the 2/3, to attain the 2/3 threshold? And we look at the quality of representation and whether it can be upscaled through training and support, etc. Anyway, that is the book. I'm hoping that you are glad you stayed. From here onwards, we shall, there is cake. I'm hoping that is an incentive for some of us who are young at heart. For those who are not so young at heart, there is the book that we are just about to launch behind here. So I shall ask us to proceed this way. Just behind here, we shall launch the book, cut a cake, have some fireworks, and hopefully mark it a successful night. Thank you. Okay, my apologies. Usually it is Madam Luciana here who does a protocol. So I have failed, in the words of my senior Ongoya, makosa yametendeka. Please remain seated. I will ask the VC and the chief guests and the honored guests together to please proceed ahead of us as we sit, and we shall follow them after they proceed. DVCs, Professor Tunga, please proceed with them. So that we can have an orderly transition and a quick one as well. Authors, please follow them. And everyone else, please join us outside as fast as possible.